Hey there, risers and thrivers. Welcome back to episode 3 of On the Up and Up. Gosh, honestly, y'all, every episode release feels so monumental because this process of getting interview participants, learning to edit, even just getting the right microphone to get started has been such a learning curve for me. And I really just dropped myself into the deep end without having a proper plan. But I really appreciate the continued support and patience of all of you that tune in for each new episode. And for those of you, if this is your first time listening to On the Up and Up, thank you for listening. Now, some of my continued listeners have pointed something out. Apparently, I've never introduced myself. So I'd like to say, hey there, everyone. My name is Janine Heinrich, and I'm the host and creator of this podcast. And I created it as an extension of the research that I was conducting on the experiences of underrepresented entrepreneurs. But more than that, I created it with the goal to share remarkably inspiring stories, encourage knowledge sharing, and facilitate a safe space for critical conversations. For this week's episode, as I said earlier about having a learning curve, the microphone quality isn't great because we had to record it virtually and I was using my old microphone. But that doesn't take away from the great conversation that you're going to hear between myself and Jonas Ngoenha, who is the co-founder and CEO of Beazy, an all-in-one platform for teams to plan, produce, and deliver content from start to finish. In this episode, Jonas and I will discuss how he serendipitously fell into entrepreneurship at the age of 17 through his passion for photography, the just do it mindset, and why you should just get started with whatever idea you have today. And he'll also share useful tips for aspiring and early stage founders. So with that being said, thank you, Jonas, for joining me. And without further ado, would you like to just take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Thanks a lot for having me. Super nice to be here. Yeah, my name is Jonas. I'm from Switzerland, Mozambique, 24, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Beazy. So with Beazy, we're a Berlin-based startup, but we're fully remote, and we're trying to build the operating system for the creative economy. That's a fancy way of saying all-in-one platform where you can plan, produce, and deliver content from beginning to finish. And I'm a photographer myself, or mostly was a photographer myself. These days, not so much anymore. And so we started building these tools for ourselves, and then we built community, and things kind of like started growing from there, and it's been like a messy little journey.
Actually, walk us through a little bit of that journey because we had our own conversation and I'm a bit aware of your background, which is incredibly unique. I mean, I remember you saying that you dropped out of high school, you had a passion for photography, found out how to commercialize that. So do you just want to walk us through that a little bit? How did you even get started into this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the way you said it is kind of true, but kind of the nicer way in the bad way, not that. No, I mean, I dropped out of high school when I was 17, and the reason for that was not to start a business or anything. I just hated going to school, to be honest. And both of my parents are university professors and researchers, so they almost disowned me at that point. But that was a fun bit. I was honestly not doing much for those first 6 months. I also do a lot of parkour free running, so jumping on walls. So I was spending my time with my best friend, jumping on walls and smoking a lot, to be honest. So not that glamorous. But quickly, I met my co-founder Julia. She was studying in Switzerland as a bioengineer and neuroscientist, and so we met around photography actually, and we quickly started talking about different business ideas. And so at the beginning, it was not related to photography at all. We were working on what we call the Amazon of the sharing economy, which was a disaster. That was very, very bad. But with that project, we won a little grant in Switzerland called the Social Impact Towards Switzerland, and 10,000 Swiss francs from her engineering school. So we won those two first grants, and so that's kind of like what made us start, let's say, at that point. But very quickly we realized that okay, our project, Amazon of the sharing economy, that was not going to work. We had absolutely no experience, no nothing, and so we kind of got slapped in the face very quickly by a lot of different investors, and so we had to kind of bring it down. So we moved to Berlin with what we call like peer-to-peer platform for photography equipment. So Airbnb for photography equipment, right? And this was what we knew best, which was photography, and we wanted to solve the problems that we had ourselves. And so we were photographers, students. Photography equipment is very, very expensive. One lens can
Yeah.
cost over €1,000. You know this with microphones, cameras, it gets very expensive.
I've
And
learned the hard way.
exactly. And the main issue there is that it's expensive, but also a lot of this equipment you're not going to use most of the time. Most photographers have kind of like one favorite lens, one favorite microphone. You end up accumulating quite a lot of specialized gear that you don't use all the time. So we thought, you know what, why not launch this platform to share it, right? Which is not a brand new idea in itself. Everybody kind of thought of this, but it was pretty easy to launch. And we started hosting a lot of photography events in Berlin in order to meet our first users.
Quick question about that. Even prior to, because you said your first idea was this Amazon of the sharing economy, and it didn't really go well. Well, clearly there was something to it though, because you did get a couple of grants, which is still impressive for an idea that got shitted on pretty hard. Excuse my language. So I think my question is, how did you? Because maybe I missed it in what you said, but how did you go from the Amazon of the sharing economy to switching more into solving a problem that you yourself were personally facing as a photographer?
Well, if you want, actually, the idea started. I think we were just chilling in a room one day, and so we thought we had this idea. At the beginning, it was related to photography, actually, but it lasted about 5 minutes because then we're like, oh, but wait, if we're going to build a platform to share photography equipment, why does not what might as well just share everything, and why not do deliveries, and not why not do homemade food? And so that it kind of got way too much very quickly. So that lasted about 5 minutes, and so once we realized that we didn't have the skills to build all that, we didn't have all the network. There were so each one of those ideas is a full startup that could take 20 years in itself. And so then, okay, let's bring it back. Let's come back to the beginning, to what we know and what we know best, and what we know we can actually do and solve for ourselves as well. And so that was kind of like the messy journey. And we did have the grants, I guess, just because we got lucky, first of all. But then the idea in itself, I still believe it makes sense, right? It's just that it's not like a full startup that you can just build like this. It's probably something that's going to take 25 years at minimum. But then also, I talk a lot, and maybe I'm not so bad at bullshitting people, so that kind of helped a little bit, I guess. So that was one little skill, I guess. It's just we spent
Yeah.
time on those decks and all those different things, and so that helped a little bit at the beginning.
Most entrepreneurs are very good talkers. I think at the end of the day, being a founder is selling. Whether you're selling your business idea to a business angel or you're selling it to customers to buy it, so that makes a lot of sense. I think the going off of that actually, did you even know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur from the beginning, or did you just kind of stumble upon this? Like, because like you said, you left high school, your parents were pissed, you're in this phase, you come up upon this idea, but like, did you know that that was a path you wanted to take?
No, not particularly. So that wasn't something I was like aiming for. Like, yes, I want to be the next Bill Gates or Elon Musk or whatever. That was not part of my dreams, let's say. But it's kind of one of those things. You can always go back and find those examples. And people love to do this. Yeah, when I was 12, I sold for like 50 euros or something. I have some of those examples, but I don't think that really means anything. But no, I just kind of stumbled onto it, to be honest, especially because of my co-founder Julia. She was taking some entrepreneurship classes, and then I was watching a lot of Shark Tank at that time. So
Felt inspired. Fair enough. Okay, so then before I had even cut you off, you had moved then to Berlin, and then you
Right.
started building this community. So do you want to continue taking it from there?
I'll try to keep it short. No, it was
No,
just
all good.
we went through like 3 or 4 different pivots actually, and so that was quite interesting. This is why I was saying like it was quite a messy path, because at the beginning when we got to Berlin, we had kind of like built out the basics of the platform, and so like okay, now we don't know anybody in Berlin. I still don't speak German actually, and so in order to meet our first users, we thought okay, let's start doing a bunch of photography events, and so those worked really well. We had almost like 100 people at the very first, kind of like meetups, very basic meetups outside, and so we had almost 100 people at the first one, so we did over 65 of those events in 2019, and we built a community of over 3,000 creatives. And so we just kept them going, because it was fun and it was good marketing. But then the
Yeah.
community started asking us, can you add locations as well, studios? And so I thought, yeah, I mean, that's just like one extra category. If we have some tractions, if you people want it, yes, we can add it. And then quickly, actually, we started getting approached in the year after by companies like Zalando, SAP, and Pinterest. So they came to us because we had the equipment, we had the locations, and they asked, but do you also have the creatives? I was like, I mean, kind of, yeah, through the community. So we thought, fuck it, all in one, let's go at it. And so that's when we started pivoting a little bit to B2B and started targeting those companies, not just with individual bookings, let's say, but kind of like the whole package, right? But then another thing came that we started noticing that actually matching companies and suppliers, let's say, is not enough. To do a whole production, you actually need quite a lot of collaboration. And once you have all the different people and all the different pieces, you need to work together for multiple days, weeks, sometimes even months. And so we started building our own tools to actually manage those productions. we realized there's another startup in Berlin that's building in exactly the same direction as us, but we started from the marketplace, they started from the SaaS. So we talked a little bit, can we do maybe some partnerships, let's start working together. And at some point we just acquired them actually. And so that was cool. So we ended up acquiring another startup quite early on. So that was a there's positives and bad there. So that's positive and negatives. So that's pretty cool. And so now we keep on building in that direction. So when we say all in one, it's of course all the network, so creatives, locations, equipment, and then all the tools you need as well to manage those productions and creative businesses from A to Z.
Wow, okay, that's incredibly impressive. I mean, an acquisition is no small feat. I would say at least it sounds very impressive in my opinion. I mean, what I think is interesting about what you just said is you did start listening to your customers essentially, or start listening to your community at the end of the day, right? So you built up the community who was giving you direct feedback. They said, hey, locations. You're like, well, let's look into it. It's not that much harder for us to do. There seems to be a bit of traction there. Then you got major clients coming on board saying, hey, do you have the creatives? Like, funny enough, got this community of people right here who are looking for this. Like, this is a nice match made in heaven. So I think my other question to that, though, is as a founder in and of itself, how did you know what to do and how to go about founding a company, right? Like, I mean, it is your first company. At the time, how old were you when you started this?
I think when we really started the idea, it said I was 17, and then it got serious when I was like 18, 19, something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So you were incredibly young at that point as well. So how did you figure out what to do? How did you, yeah, just navigate all of the new things that you were learning at this time?
I mean, the short version is YouTube. That's a very short version. The longer version is, I mean, that you just kind of like start and figure things out as you go, right? So luckily, I have two really good co-founders, and so they have more experience than me. They're a little bit more structured than me, let's say, and so that helps a lot. But yeah, I mean, for me, I was 17. I was like, okay, what do I really have to lose? Very worst case, I come back on my mom's couch. That's about it, you know. And so I was like, yeah, nothing to lose. Let's just start it. And then also, I always have this kind of idea in mind, like you should just start, try things out, and you'll figure things out as you go. And we're still learning things every single day. And so that was also one of the reasons then kind of how do you say afterwards that I justified dropping out of high school. So it's just kind of like the rates at which you learn new things, right? Every day you're waking up and you have to solve new problems that you didn't even know existed, and so you have to figure things out and learn new things. And most of the things we do, the answers are online, you know, or like you can just message people and ask them. And that was another thing that we just learned is that even when we're getting slapped in the face, for example, by all these investors at the very beginning, just the fact that they would actually reply and that they would actually talk to us, you know, even if they were saying, no, I'm not interested, I'm never going to invest in you guys or this business or whatever, they still took the time to take calls and teach us new things, etc. So it all of a sudden felt like, oh, this is actually not that hard. And like you can just send emails and people reply. You can just send LinkedIn messages to some of these people you see on TV and some of them reply, you know, and so yeah.
Fair enough. I think that's an interesting point that you bring up because one, you're saying just do it and just figure it out, and we kind of talked about this briefly. I'm very much the planner. I said this already. For this podcast was 2 years of me talking about it, sitting there being like, well, first I need to do research. Who am I to even think that I can do a podcast? You know, until one day I was like, okay, it's getting embarrassing. I actually just need to do it. But then when you just do it, this learning curve is wild. Like I said to you, Murphy's Law, anything that could go wrong will go wrong. And for me, I saw that very clearly with like going from everything from the microphones to the software to if everything's a problem. I mean, and even just learning how to use the right tools to clean the audio up after, I was like, I thought this would be very straightforward because I've used iMovie. Oh no, these audio interfaces are a whole other mess.
It's so much
So
that goes into it, right?
yeah, so I wanted to ask from your side. I mean, of course, you're getting no's a lot from the investors and other people, but it's also fulfilling because they are giving you criticism back that helps you to improve. But how do you also at the same time keep yourself mentally going through this learning curve, right? Because you've got the learning curve, you don't know at the same time. You also have a lot of uncertainty as a founder.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I mean, on one side, I do think like you need a little bit of both, right? You need kind of like the planning side where like you have at least some sort of a plan. Because if you just go into it and you have no idea what's going to happen in 2 weeks, and you don't even have an idea of what could happen, let's say, that's probably a bad idea as well. But then on the other side, I do think you should just kind of like get started and see how things work. There's just like one thing here that, no, sorry, two little things actually I wanted to mention that are quite interesting is that I read somewhere like somewhere on YouTube, I guess somebody was saying the reason why you should just get started is that nobody, and you should launch soon because nobody remembers the launch. If you think of all your favorite companies, you don't know when Facebook launched, you don't remember that, you don't remember when Airbnb launched, when Uber launched, when Google launched, and you also don't care. And so nobody cares about when you first launched. And then there was another thing where like everybody has ideas, great ideas under the shower, but that idea that you have under the shower is worth exactly $0. But then just the fact that you have a name to it, that you write it down, maybe it's like $1, and then you have a domain name, $2, and then you have like a little bit of like a pitch deck, $10. And every little thing that you do kind of adds up to that. And all of a sudden, even if you just have a website, you're already ahead of like 90% of people. It's like, okay, you know what? Let's just do at least the basic, and then let's go from there. But then, sorry for the nose and stuff. I mean, most investors are actually pretty nice, and most people that you talk to are actually pretty nice out there. And so they're going to say no, but they're at least usually going to provide some feedback, especially if you ask nicely and you're just getting started. Most people want to help out. But I was also lucky because I was the only job I had before this in my life. I guess a couple like part-time job was that I was going door to door in Switzerland asking for money for the Red Cross, and so.
Oh, you were one of those people. It's like the ones I see in Berlin where I try to go the opposite end of the street because I know they're going to be like, "Hi, can I talk to you?" And you're like, no, not today."
It's absolutely horrible. And even worse because like I was inside people's homes, door to door, etc. People closing the door, insulting us. Like people called the cops on me so many times. So at some point, it's like, come on, it can't be that hard. It's probably the same thing. And so at some point, if you do it enough, the no's don't even affect you anymore. And then the one big difference here with investors or sales, for example, is that at the end of the day, you just need one. And that when you just keep that in mind, that is super motivating because it doesn't really matter if like you have 2,000 people that tell you no. You literally just need one person to give you money or to buy from you or to whatever, and you're in business. And so I'm like, okay, but just go on LinkedIn, just type investors on LinkedIn, look at the hundreds of thousands or millions of people you can find. I'm like, I can convince one, at least one, I should be able to do that. And so that kind of keeps you going a little bit, I would say, yeah.
Fair enough. I think that's a really cool perspective to have on that, actually, because when you do think about it that way, you just start to realize it's a numbers game, right? It's literally, let me just get out there and talk to as many people as possible. There's got to be someone that's going to bite, someone that's going to believe in it just about as much as I can. Maybe I'm on a good day, I'm in my sales mode,
And I was just gonna say, like, even if you don't really believe that you can at least convince somebody, there's also that sentence like the first investors are like friends, family, and fools, right? The triple Fs. It's like there's gotta be one dumb guy with money out there, at least that. So like probably there's a little bit of something like that. So I really think like you should just kind of get started talking to people and go with the very basics. There's no need to waste time with too much planning or too much building or anything. Just gotta literally get started and then you'll figure things out as you go. And there's that other sense as well, like everybody has a really great plan until you get punched in the face, and that's very true as well. And so the second you get started, as you were saying, like you have so many more things that you didn't anticipate, but at least you're starting, and you'll learn those when the time comes.
For sure. And I think at the same time, it's about embracing a little bit of the journey. Like, I kind of mock myself now where something goes wrong and I'm like, all right, I'm just going to make this a series now. This is going to be part of the podcast content. It's like, hey guys, this is everything that I did wrong. Because I remember my mom was saying to me in the beginning, like, well, these days everybody has a podcast. I mean, it can't be that difficult. You should be able to figure it out. And I'm like, well, clearly I can't. So, I mean, I'm figuring it out, but it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be, which is ironic. But I wanted to also kind of go back. How do you, a big portion of this is also having the confidence, the audacity, and also being able to convince. And I mean, it seems like you had a bit of experience now with the Red Cross job. I mean, that's rejection because people are mean, right? Yeah. So how do you keep your head up through that? And
this kind of like what you were just saying right now, that everybody has a podcast, right? And the negative of this and like social media and even worse, like business and startups, is that everybody wants to give like and you need almost to give yourself a really good image, make it look like you're doing amazing things and that life is easy and you're living the best life possible, but that that's not true. And so then once you start talking to people, you realize that nobody has any idea what they're doing out there. So this is why I love listening to these entrepreneur podcasts or whatever, especially when people actually go a little bit more in depth. If you
Mm-hmm.
follow them on LinkedIn or etc., they look like geniuses doing everything crazy. Then you actually talk to them and say, oh yeah, your startup is fucking burning out there. Like you have no idea what you're doing. And like, I can probably, just figure it out like that as well and just kind of like improvise every day. And so it's a little bit of that, just kind of like realizing that most people out there don't have any idea what they're doing. And so if now they have some things that they're good at, they didn't start that way, then they just had to learn from scratch as well, from somebody else, or just improvising as well. And then it's just a little bit of confidence, maybe being like, I know that there's a lot of things I don't know, and the more things you do, the more you realize all the different things you have no idea about. But I always think that, okay, if I give myself enough time, I can learn. Like the information is out there, it's accessible. Other people have done it before. And so I can probably find the information and go through the process. It might take me 3 times more, 3 times as long, but there's going to be a point where I can figure it out. I can know how to edit a video or a podcast or something. It's going to be really hard, but I can probably do it.
Facts.
Hopefully.
And for sure. And I also agree with that because the first time it might take you 3 times as long, but now you've gone through that curve, right? So the next time, maybe it's like 2 times, 1.5 times as long until eventually you can just do it really quickly and it's second nature. It is just about practicing and continuing with it. And so kind of taking it back to being a founder, I mean, how did you, because you talk about raising and everything, but how does one even go about that process? Like, how do you even go ahead and find an angel or family, friends, and fools? I mean, especially, I mean, getting it from family and friends sometimes can be incredibly challenging, right? So, how does one even do that? Or how did you do that?
Sometimes you don't even want to ask your friends and family. You might just want to skip that whole step. I was
Fair.
just gonna say, actually, sorry, just one last thing I remember just from
Yeah.
before is that there's a very good saying, or a very good advice, let's say, and I completely agree that, like, as the founder of anything, you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. And actually, if you're the smartest person in your company, you're probably doing it wrong. And so the idea is just you need to just get started, do it enough, and very quickly you're gonna be able to hire people which are supposed to be much better than you and whatever it is they do. And so very quickly you end up being kind of like the dumber person in the company, actually. And that's normal, and that's your job, actually. And so kind of
Hmm.
understanding that you're not expected, nobody expects you to do everything. That helps. But
Actually, I heard sorry, also to kind of piggyback off of that, I
yeah,
heard something very similar. Someone said, if the CEO looks like a dumb person amongst everyone else, they're a really good CEO. And it was like, because it's basically, if he's the smartest person in the room and all you hear is from the CEO, it's probably not a great one. The
yeah,
team's
yeah.
probably not that great either. So it falls in that direction. But I agree for
And
sure.
like when you start hiring, like if you start hiring, for example, somebody for like performance marketing, you hire them because they're much better than you. Like once you hire a first engineer or a first whatever, ideally they should be 10 times as good as you, right? And so very quickly, yeah, you end up being the dumbest person around, I guess. So
Yeah.
that's normal, and everybody knows that's how it goes. So that is pretty cool. But then for the fundraising, short answer again, if you're looking for investors, just go on LinkedIn. Everybody's on LinkedIn, and people. The good thing as well is that investors want you to reach out to them. That's their job. It's to invest in startups, and so they want to hear from you. Of course, like you have to do your research. Different investors invest in different things, but
Hmm.
there's so much money out there, and there's so many people that can give you money. Sometimes you don't realize how much money there is in the world, and how many people can just write 50K checks, 100K checks, and not even think about it. And so I just have two of our investors actually just quite recently that told us literally that I invested 2 years ago. I didn't understand what you do. I just like the energy. And still today, I'm not sure they know what we do. I'm not sure they actually understand. And so, but that doesn't really matter. And so there's a lot of money out there in the world, and you just have to go and find it. And there's a lot of free money you can get as well from
Mm.
amazing programs. So we were part, for example, of Google for Startups, and so that one is great. But also these grants that you can get as a student, as a recent graduate, or because you work on this sort of businesses, wherever in Switzerland, for example, you can get money at the city level, the canton level, which is kind of like the state level, and then the federal level as well. So there's in many countries you can find money out there. It's just that nobody tells you, nobody
Yeah.
advertises it to you, but there is a lot of free money out there, and literally just start messaging people. Just start messaging many people. And there's also a lot of people who could be your investor that don't know it yet. They're not investors yet. You can think of like your neighbors, some random lawyer you know, some random doctor you know, some whatever. They might, maybe it's not going to be 100K, but maybe they can write 5K checks, 500 euros, whatever. Any little bit helps. And so if you can, I would say, uh, those are technical details then, but you can do safe notes, for example, or convertible notes, so you don't have to put a valuation on the company, etc. And you just start taking in even small checks. Somebody wants to give you 50 euros, take it, just take it. And you go from there, it adds up. So you don't have to go and find those super famous investors only. You don't have to do crazy things. There is money out there. A lot of people have a lot of money and they're actually accessible and they want to put their money somewhere. And so people will usually at least hear you out. And so don't be scared to just, and as we said, worst case that happens, you email 100 people, they say no, and you email 100 more, and you just keep going. Yeah.
Actually, a quick question to that and following up to it, because I've been hearing a lot of people say, prior to 2022 was significantly easier to raise money, and now money's super tight. Would you say that that's actually the case now, or do you still believe that, yeah, there is actually money out there?
A little bit of both, I would say. We have this
Okay.
discussion many times because like we raised multiple times as well through these different years, etc. And so every time we raised, it felt like it wasn't a bad time. So during COVID, when the war started, all these different things. So every time it was bad situations, but yeah, it does feel, if you read the headlines, that like prior 2022, 2018, 19, 20 were kind of the years where people are just throwing money at you. And so that's probably true, but at the same time, there's always money out there still. And so it doesn't mean that you can't raise. Maybe, and this goes back to like fundraising is exactly like sales. And so you just have to talk to as many people. Maybe you can still raise, but maybe instead of talking to 100 people, you need to talk to 300. But if you're serious about doing this and you really want to grow your business, even if you have to talk to 1,000, like this, it's just gonna take more time, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. Maybe the bar is a little bit higher, but one of the startups in our cohort, for example, in Google for Startups, Propel, they're really good. They just closed like a 2.5 million round 3 weeks ago, and so that you have people out there raising crazy amounts of money, and it's still happening. So there's no excuse. Just gotta go.
Just do it. No excuses. Figure it out. Go talk to
Yes.
people.
I mean, it's just gonna. This is, I don't know if it's related or not, but like there's always the topic, for example, of like as minority founders, for example, sometimes the bar is a little bit higher. Of course, as a woman founder, as a black founder, as a whatever, there's sometimes maybe especially if you're trying to raise in Europe, etc., the bar might be higher, and so that might be true. The statistics are out there, but at the same time, if you're building your business, you don't really have time to focus on any of that. And so, okay, for you, maybe you can't just talk to 100 investors, you're going to have to talk to 500, but that's just what you're going to have to do. You don't have time to worry about that, because at the end of the day, if somebody tells you no and you're focused on like, why did they tell me no, and you take it too personally, they don't care. They're moving on with their day. The one that is suffering is you. The one that is not moving forward is you. And so you just have to literally just
Yeah.
keep running. This sounds very weird, but it's just, yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, I've heard this from a lot of founders as well. And even statistically speaking, people have said, if the average archetype of a founder, white male, prestigious university, has to speak to 100, as a woman of color or something else, you're going to have to speak to 200 to 500 more, right? And it's true, but also at the same time, I agree with you with just moving on, because at the end of the day, you probably don't want those other investors anyway who have that certain prejudice. And I think someone said it's like dating a little bit with looking for an investor. Like, once they're your investor, you're married to them. You need to answer to them. So pick your investor wisely, because they can make or break your business as well, right? At least that's what I've heard.
Oh yeah, I
uh,
completely agree. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, that can having like good investors, especially if you don't want to take bad investors, and you don't want to take anybody's money, right? 'Cause like once, as you said, you're married, and once they're there, it's going to be very hard to get rid of them, and so they're going to be there for a long time. So it might sometimes be better not to take that money. And that's maybe a choice. And you can always bootstrap, or there's always other ways. But just one little thing that I still have to kind of remind myself, and I still get shocked sometimes, is that investors are actually not kind of like your boss. You don't really report to them, and they are the ones that spend money. And so their job at some point is almost to help you out. And so of course they expect you to make them more money, but it's almost more like I'm giving them tasks to do stuff for us instead of us reporting to them. So it goes a little bit on both ways, in both ways. But I always have that image in mind that like fuck, these people, I need to only give them good news, I need to deliver on whatever we're doing, etc. But they invested knowing that like it's what 90, 95, 99% of startups are going to die anyways. That's the
Mm-hmm.
basic expectation. And so they're on your side actually, and much more than what you think actually. And that's just one thing that I always have to remind myself, because that's not the popular image, let's say.
I'd say definitely isn't the popular opinion. And even kind of circling back to some of the things that you said before, you've given a very human image to investors and to just people to reach out to. And I say this because even I had my first episode with Ali Bangura from Adan, and he was saying that at the end of the day, these are just people. He's like, there's the same people who eat, they're the same people who shit, they're people. Like, and there's no difference between them and us at the end of the day. And I think that is an important message to carry on to everyone else, because I think oftentimes, especially if a founder has a minority background, something, you feel like maybe you have imposter syndrome, or you're a bit nervous to reach out to these people because you put them on such a pedestal. But at the end of the day, they're people. And if you understand what they need as your investor, that they just want you to be successful, you understand what the dynamic is at the end of the day, right?
And it's like some investors out there are might be, there's always exceptions, right? Some investors are
Yeah.
absolutely horrible, some are really amazing, etc. But also like this thing I just mentioned, like putting them on a pedestal. I keep on doing this every time as well. It's like the criteria to be an investor is literally just having money. You know, it doesn't mean that they're smart or anything like that. And I spent so much time, a couple times, you know, for past rounds, putting together like crazy financial models, etc. Because I thought they understand these crazy financials. I'm the dumb one. I have to do all these predictions, etc. And then I send it to them. We have all the tracking things, etc. I see that either they spent literally 30 seconds on it, or they have no idea about it, even them. You know, so like they don't know all these things, and so it's
Facts.
yeah, you just gotta stop
Facts.
putting them on pedestals. Like, yeah, the criteria is just it's a person with a bag of money. That's about it, you know. So you want,
Facts. No, I agree with you. I saw this. I mean, I was recently talking to my supervisor at work, and I needed to create like a unit economic model because I was trying to figure something out and trying to see if this business model would work or not. And I remember sitting there and be like, "Oh, this is so straightforward." Like, I did my master's in entrepreneurship. No one ever really taught me how to do this, which would have been super helpful because you can tell if a business model works or not that fast.
yeah, all right, cool.
But at the same time, he said the exact same thing. He's like, most investors would never understand this anyway, so there's really no point in like wasting your time doing this. And I was like, what? But they're an investor. What do you mean? These people should be like the best Excel modeling, financial modeling gurus. Like, no, they don't know.
Yeah, they don't know, and they honestly don't care. You know, like on our
Yeah.
financial models and our pitch deck, I think average watch time, maybe financial model was like a minute or so, maybe a little bit more. Pitch deck is like 30 seconds, and so you spend hours doing that pitch deck, beautiful designs, everything that looks beautiful, all these crazy projections, etc. Nobody gives a shit, you know. Yeah.
So actually, that goes back to a little bit like, if they don't really care about the business model, they don't really care about your pitch deck. From your perspective, what are they really looking at when it comes to you as a founder and even, yeah, your company?
It depends on what stage your company is at, right? If you're like a Series C company trying to raise like 500 million, yeah, it's a different ballgame. But right now, for most people, potentially they're interested in this conversation. For example, like early stage startups, let's say all the way from like pre-seed to maybe Series A, something like this. Most of it, or like pre-Series A at least, most of it is about you know, you as a person, your team, your co-founders, that sort of stuff. Because if you think of like some of the investors that invested into Beazy in 2019, we pivoted like 4 times. The business they invested in doesn't exist anymore. It's something completely different. The only constant at the end of the day is you as a founder, and you're the one that is gonna make or break this thing. And very surprisingly, very often, like I hear from a lot of founders that maybe fail the first company, and investors that invested in that first company that went bankrupt actually want to invest in the second one, because it's not necessarily about the idea or the business model or whatever business model you have today at the idea stage or just getting started could be completely different in 2 weeks, you know. And so that doesn't really matter. The belief is really more that you as a person, again, can figure it out as you go, you know. And most of this startup thing is kind of like a scientist thing, you know. Like I'm not that structured at that level, but just kind of running tests, you know. And so it's more like your pitch at the end of the day is not really like we know what we're doing and this is step A, B, C, and it's going to be amazing. It's more like we think this could work and we want to try A, B, C. More than likely, they're all going to fail, and then we're going to try D, E, and F, you know. And we're going to try the next ones, etc. So it's really just about testing and really about just learning things and then going from there and adapting. And so this is why there's so much talk about pivoting, because we all know that whatever idea you have right now, it's probably shit, and so we're probably gonna have to move on from that.
But how did you let go of the idea, right? Like I see this with a lot of founders. I mean, I've run a couple accelerator programs, and some founders are steadfast about this idea. And even if the tests are showing that this may not be the way to go,
Yeah, yeah,
they're really having a hard time getting themselves to pivot. So
I can
how was
imagine.
that from your experience? Like you're seeing that these things aren't working. Was it easy for you to pivot? Did you have a hard time with that? How did that look?
I don't know if I'm the best person to reply to this one because I kind of still hold on to the idea, to be honest. And so even that initial thing of like Amazon of the sharing economy, I don't tell it to most people. But
Okay.
I still have the thing like if this works well enough, we might be able to, move our way back into it. And so it just kind of feels like okay, I thought it was going to be 3 steps to get there. It's actually 15, and we're going to have to do a bunch of detours, etc. But I still feel that like most of what we do can still come back to that original idea. But otherwise, it's just that like the first time we pivoted, that was really hard. That was really hard. And so you really kind of have to accept that something is not working, So if you want to keep this going, there's a limit to how much you can push against like I just say currents or whatever. If it's not working, you can keep going for 3 months, 6 months maybe, but you're not going to be able to keep going for the next 10 years with something that doesn't work. And so at some point, you're going to have to try something else. And so once you let it go that first time, second, third, fourth time, it's much easier because then you kind of get used to it and it's more about the final goal and not necessarily how you get there. But I don't have much advice on this one, unfortunately.
No, fair enough. I think that's an interesting way to put it because instead of being like telling people, "Oh, just get rid of the idea," I do think kind of maybe having that little bit of a mindset shift of like, "Okay, I thought this was going to be 3 steps, but it took me 15 steps instead." Is it maybe a little bit easier for someone to digest? It's like, "Okay, maybe this is just a way to get to that overarching mission." Because at the end of the day, like you said, it's experimentation and you have to follow what's working, especially once you start taking money, right? Like you got
Yeah,
to start showing that something's working.
yeah, exactly. Or at least having a story around that. But maybe for this, I can revert the question to you. I guess maybe for the podcast as well, because I
Yeah.
imagine maybe you have like a kind of like I'm really not good at this, but kind of like that mission, vision statement. And so you're trying to achieve something, and maybe the podcast is one way to do it, but you could also do it in other ways, right? How do you go about that as well? Because I imagine that's probably the answer, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the thing came from all the research that I was doing in the beginning, right? So researching into women of color founders and their experiences, trying to understand the aspects of intersectionality and that Hitcher plays. And I was like, okay, this is all fun and good and all. And while I enjoy research, there's also another aspect of me. There's like, I enjoy the conversations more. And also, what was really important to me was like, I love when people have like really critical discussions, like in a safe space where even though we disagree, we can disagree in a very safe manner with each other. Also, having the chance to share people's stories and experiences, because that's the only way you learn. And then making sure that there's this aspect of education. And so I was like, of course, I've got this grander vision in my head of like, I would love for this to be like a cool media production, and a great source for everyone to learn and come together and have a huge community. But I can't start at that level. I don't even know how to start at that level. And so for me, that was like, okay, let's take it back to the basics of what did I enjoy doing throughout the entire process. And that was interviewing people and sharing stories and like those cool little nuggets. And so that was kind of my avenue for figuring out where to get that started. Um, I don't have a proper plan of how to take it from here, to be honest, yet. But I think for now, I'm just trying to first just get a grasp of doing this kind of okay, well enough, and then see how I can take it up from there, because I am one person, and like you said, you need to do it well enough that you can attract other people to jump on board so I can move it forward. And that would be great because being a one woman show of production, social media, editing is a lot.
It's a lot.
Um,
Just production, like full companies with like teams of 15, 20 people do just that, so that's the whole thing. But I
yeah,
love that mindset actually, because I think that's probably the right way to go about it. Because if you're too focused on the product itself, maybe the podcast itself, you kind of get absorbed into all statistics and many analytics and many different things. But
oh yeah.
if you're focused on that larger mission, then the podcast is just one of the ways you can get there, I guess. And so that probably much more flexible. And if it doesn't work, you can pivot out of it or something like that.
Exactly. And I think it's kind of going to finding what makes you really like really brings you joy a little bit. Like I love my job that I have in my 9 to 5, right? As a venture architect, it's fun to build companies within like a corporate context, right? But at the same time, I genuinely find this fun to do. And I remember even talking to Ali in the first episode. I was like, he was saying that he was doing these road shows around Germany when he first started Adan, and then I was like, oh well, how many people? And he was like, oh well, for the one in Hamburg there were 3, and I'm like, well, didn't that feel like a failure or like kind of didn't make you feel good? And he's like, no, I was genuinely happy that 3 people showed up. Like this was great. And it's this like joy that he had that even if it wasn't at the scale that he imagined it at, it was doing something that was fun for him. And I think that's the same for me. It's like if even if just a couple of people were like, oh, this was fun to listen to, or I learned so much from your conversation with Jonas, then I'm like, all right, cool, we did it. Like this is enough. So I think that's at the core.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And for me as well, I have so many stories of like these little one-off comments or something like this, and that's kind of what keeps you going. Maybe what stays motivated. Just a little tip, I guess, for the audience or something. I don't do
Go
this,
for
but
it.
it's just from my mom, I guess. She has a little folder actually of all the positive emails people send her, and she just keeps them on the folder. And when she's depressed, then she just goes through it, and that's a really good idea, actually.
I
All
love
these little
that.
tiny achievements, and you just keep them together and say, oh yeah, it actually made this one person happy, and that's enough, and that keeps you going.
1000%. It's actually, wow, I keep referring to like different conversations that I'm going to have, but there's actually another founder I'm having a conversation with, and we're talking about how to increase your luck surface area, which I know sounds like a weird thing, but how do you do certain things to help yourself have more opportunities to be lucky? And one of the things that we talk about is he calls it his points of validation. I call it my confidence bank. Kind of having like, I have a little list of things that I'm like are little wins for me. So when I get into a situation where I'm feeling pretty shitty or I'm like, oh, I didn't do this well or I'm super nervous, it's like, just look at that. And it's like, all right, you managed to do all these things before in the past. Why should this situation be any different for you? And
That's really cool. Oh, that's a really good advice.
yeah, but I think it's important. You need to have these little wins for yourself, right? So that because otherwise, what else do you have to hold on to? You have to believe that you can do it. No one
Yeah,
else is going to believe that you can do it unless you do it.
that you should put that on a poster or something. That was really nice. No, I agree. I agree. Especially then, startups or trying new projects, etc. Like most of the things you do are failures. Like most of everything just fails and is a problem, is a disaster. Most of your life right now, I imagine, is probably just solving problems and figuring things out, etc. So you gotta hold on to those little
Uh,
things that work left and right.
Facts. Adulthood is ghetto. Figuring stuff out is rough. I was like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I mean,
Exactly, exactly. You just gotta keep yourself. Yeah, and that's one. It's very true. You gotta keep yourself motivated because nobody else is gonna do it for you. And so if you're not able to do that yourself, and having
yeah.
system probably helps quite a lot.
Yeah, maybe one last question around just this topic of keeping yourself motivated. I mean, you talk about your mom's advice to have like an email with all her emails, but how do you keep yourself motivated? I mean, at the end of the day, being a founder is also not your sole identity, right? I mean, you have other things going on in your life. So, how do you, first of all, balance being a founder with everything else in your life, but then also keeping that motivation up because being a founder is a marathon, not a sprint. So,
Mhm.
you're in this for a while.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
two
yeah.
questions.
I
Yeah.
mean, the part of like your founder is not being a founder is not your sole identity. I mean, ideally, but most of the time, you kind of identify, and it kind of consumes your whole life, you know. So I used to have a lot of other hobbies. That's why I'd say I used to. So like I still like to say that I'm a free runner, etc. But the last time I seriously went to train was like maybe 3 years ago. So that's not, yeah. So it kind of starts taking up a lot of your life. But then, yeah, the thing of like it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. That's very true. So I just have like one little
Hmm.
story here. It's just when we started like watching a lot of conferences and things about marketplaces, right? And people are saying, yeah, it takes at least 7 years to just get the first initial like how do you say positive results from like a marketplace, from building a marketplace. Like, yeah, 7 years, whatever, I heard it, but I didn't really listen. And now that we're like 4 or 5 years in, I'm like, oh yeah, that it's really 7 years, probably much more. And so just kind of realizing that everything you do is going to take a lot of time, and so then everything is kind of normal, and just making sure that you're on track. And then for the thing of like staying motivated, I would say, yeah, it goes back to kind of like that mission, vision, etc. As long as you feel kind of like you have that larger goal, and it's not just about making money, for example, and not about achieving these small goals every week or these huge things, but like you have that big picture vision, something you want to achieve more than just building a big business, for example. And then you can track like little progress, as long as you're moving the needle even just a little bit every day.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe it takes 20 years, but I'm going in the right direction, right? And so then sometimes we have, of course, like all our KPI dashboards and all those different things. And so even if it goes up and down, etc., every week, you have that kind of maybe cumulative view where you can see that, okay, it's still going up to the right kind of, So that there's some of these little things that you can build for yourself just to keep track, or just having little checklists or whatever. But this one, I'm not sure, because I'm a pretty optimistic person by nature, and so I kind of stay pretty energetic and motivated. But otherwise, yeah, try to pay attention to, as we were saying, like the couple things that are going well, and try to ignore all the things that are going bad, and then realizing that it's normal, and especially if you talk to other founders and you realize that everybody's in that same situation. When we had that Google program last year, we had like a monthly check-ins with all the other
Mm-hmm.
founders, and I was in full panic mode sometimes. Everything was going bad, and so then we had like two of the questions that were just going around the room and asking, what are some of the big wins you had this week, and some of the things you're worried about, right? And so when I realized that everybody around the room has the same problem of like, oh, you also have only 1 month of runway, cool, we're in the same boat, that sort of stuff. Your company is going to die in 1 month as well. Great. I talked to one founder that had his company. He had like 1 week left of runway. 1 week, and I was like, oh shit. Okay, I'm doing good. I'm doing good actually. He survived though. He survived. He made it out. So, so that's just that was motivating as well. But
Yeah.
just realizing that everybody is in the same kind of situation, even if they don't, it doesn't look like it. Because when you go on LinkedIn, you have to kind of portray yourself as if everything is going super well, etc.
Yeah.
But in the back, that's not true.
That's right, y'all. No one has it figured out, and nothing is ever as perfect as it seems. Now, if there's an idea that you've been procrastinating on getting started, this is your sign to start today. Don't worry about perfection. No one remembers the launch anyway, and you'll also learn as you go. So, with that being said, a huge thank you to Jonas for sharing not only those gems, but so many more throughout this episode, as well as your journey and advice. Also, a huge thank you to all of you for listening in. Please follow, like, rate, and or leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think about not only this episode, but the previous ones too. So, I'm really looking forward to it. And as always, onwards and upwards, y'all, and speak to you again in 2 weeks.